All right, so we are still working on adding rational numbers. So we want to find what the sum is of 1 3/4 plus -1/6. And we're going to write that in its simplest form. So remember, if we see it talk about simplest form, that's an indicator that we want to write it in a fraction form. All right, and why do we want to write it in the fraction form? I can almost bet that it's because one of our fractions is a repeating decimal. And if it's a repeating decimal, remember it never ends. So the most accurate way to write that number is to write it in fraction form. Well, I know that 1 3/4 is 1.75. So I know that that's a terminating decimal. Some of these fractions, you should just know what they are in their decimal form because you use them or see them so much. So fourths, halves, even thirds, and fifths, those are ones that we see that are being used really frequently. So you want to try to memorize those. It'll just save you a little time down the road. All right. So 1/6, I believe that that is a repeating decimal, but let's see. So if I plug in one ABC 6, second, and back, I can see that it repeats. So we should have a bar notation over the six, right? So we know that that six is going to continue to repeat. And remember, the only reason that we see that seven here is because there wasn't enough room for us to continue on with the sixes. So that is why we want to write this in a fraction form. Also, as a reminder, fractions can also be just simplified by using division to find out its decimal equivalent. So if I plug in 1 divided by 6, you'll notice that I have the same thing that we had when we did the ABC. Okay, so those are two methods for you to figure it out using your calculator. All right, so let's go ahead and solve this one. So we have 1 3/4 plus -1/6. All right. So the first thing that I like to do is when I see a double sign, I want to try to eliminate that to clean up the problem a little bit. So I see that we have a positive and a negative. Remember, this is the same thing as saying +1 times -1/6. Okay. And remember when we talked about positives and negatives, two positives or two of any kind is always going to be positive, right? So two positives equals a positive, two negatives equal a negative, and a positive and a negative. So one of each will get, I'm sorry, two negatives is a positive, and then a positive and a negative gives you a negative. Okay. This only applies if we are multiplying or dividing. Okay. So you cannot use this on addition and subtraction. Okay. So if I see a positive and a negative, then I know that that's going to become a negative, right? So now we have 1 3/4 minus 1/6. So we've just cleaned up our problem just a little bit. Now, because we have a mixed number, we want to convert that into an improper fraction. So to convert that into an improper fraction, remember Texas. So we're going to remember the abbreviations for Texas, and that is how we're going to simplify or turn this into an improper fraction. All right, so we've got 4 times 1. That gives me 4. 4 plus 3 more gives me 7. So we have 7 over 4. And we're going to subtract out our 1/6. All right. So remember when you are adding and subtracting fractions, you need a common denominator. So in other words, our denominator has to be the same. We need to cut them up into the same amount of pieces so that we can figure out what our difference is in the numerator. So to do that, we're going to go back, and this is why it's super important for us to know our multiplication facts. We're going to go back and look for our LCM, which stands for least common multiple. Okay. So we're looking for our LCM, and we're going to talk about our fours and sixes. So in other words, what I'm doing is I'm going to count by fours: 4, 8, 12, 16, 24, and I'll just, ooh, I missed one, 20. All right. Now I'm going to count by sixes. Okay. So as I count by sixes, I am looking for something that I will have in common between the two of them. So count by sixes: 6, 12, 18, 24. And I think that's enough, right? So we're going to see, do we have any numbers in common? And if so, what's the smallest? Because we're looking for the least common multiple. Oh, there it is. We have a 12. So our least common multiple is 12. So that is going to become what we call our LCD, our lowest common denominator. Okay. And so our LCD, I'm going to put that over here. LCD is going to be 12. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is rewrite this fraction using our LCD. Okay. So I'm going to say 7/4, and we're going to subtract out 1/6. Okay. Now our LCD is 12. So what would I have to multiply 4 by to get 12? Well, if you know how to count by fours, look up here. We even have it up there. So 1, 2, 3. So 4 times 3 would give me 12. So I'm going to multiply both my numerator and denominator by 3. Okay, to rewrite that fraction. All right, and what about 6? What do I need to multiply 6 by in order for me to get 12? All right. Hopefully you see that 6, 12. So that's 2, right? So I'm going to have to multiply both my numerator and denominator by 2. So let's go on and rewrite that now. All right. So 3 times 7 gives me 21. 3 times 4 gives me 12. And now I'm going to subtract out 2 times 1 to give me 2, and 2 times 6 to give me 12. Okay. So now we have a common denominator. Okay, so now we can go on and use our subtraction. We can say, what is 21 minus 2? And our denominator will remain a 12. That's basically what we're asking. Okay, so 21 minus 2 gives me 19. And remember, my denominator will stay the same. So 19/12. Okay, so we're almost there. The only thing is I noticed that my numerator is greater than my denominator. So remember, when we see that, that means that there is a whole number in there. So the fractions, again, is just to tell us how we can break up one whole into smaller pieces. But if you have a number that's greater than the denominator, then that means you have more than one in there. Okay, so you have, or one equal to one. So let's see what we have. So if I have 19 of something and I'm going to break it up into groups of 12, how many groups could I pull out of 12? Well, hopefully you realize that that's 1, right? 1 times what to give me 12? That was 12. All right. And how many more do I need to get back to 19? So remember, we're just basically trying to figure out about the state of Texas again. So 12 times 1 gives me 12, plus how many more to give me 19? That would be 7. All right, so your answer to this one then is going to be 1 7/12. That is its simplified form. We can't reduce it anymore. So that's your answer.